يعطيك العافية.
I could only imagine what kind of trauma or re-trauma it would be to hear gunfire and to know that just around the corner, just up the street, is a place that are training police who did the very thing to my son. Now they're continuing this for other families to have to experience as well.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org, our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. Today, a raid in Palestine and Black Lives Matter from Brazil to Hartford. You may remember a film, Five Broken Cameras, about popular resistance in Bil'in, Palestine. It was nominated for an Academy Award several years ago. On September 20th, we received this anguish message and a video. Alert, my whole village is awake. My Bil'in village is being raided by Israeli occupation soldiers now, 2:30 a.m. to 3:30 a.m. 60 soldiers, 4 jeeps, 2 trucks arrive and have been searching homes, about 5 of them. The soldiers are taking hard disks off the laptops, taking phones, and searching them. When asked the soldiers why they're doing this, they just said they will bring this property back. No one believes this. My car has not been returned. These are lies. What is this? Incitement, harassment, terrorism? The homes raided are for Bassel Mansour, Mohammed Khatib, Ahmed Abu Rama, Abdullah Abu Rama, Ratib Abu Rama. Hello, Obama. Will you help us?
كل ما بدي اشوف نشوف. يعطيك العافية.
وتليفونك وين؟ تفضل يجيب التليفون. شوف هذا تليفوننا هين.
It's just for academics, not for anything else. It's for my study. Just I completed my master degree. It's just for my study. No more, no less.
شو ماخذين لك من هون؟
في الهارد ديسك.
هارد ديسك.
Hello, Obama. Will you help us? Unfortunately, we know the answer to that question. Obama is too busy. He's responding, appeasing the never-ending demands from Israel for money and weapons. He just signed a $38 billion gift to the Israeli government, mostly for weapons. There is some congressional opposition. A number of people in Congress don't think he's giving enough to Israel. Incredible. Before we leave the Middle East, a note about Syria. This whole year we've been saying the UN or the US should be doing airdrops to cities under siege in Syria. Well, last week we realized that the UN is doing some airdrops, but to just one area. It's an area controlled by Assad forces that are surrounded by ISIS. The airdrops go there, but nowhere else. The thing is, Assad has airplanes, and its ally, Russia, has airplanes. They could do the airdrops themselves, but the UN does it for them. And that frees up Assad planes and Russian planes to drop hell on the Syrians. Now an interview with Bishop John Selders of Hartford about his Black Lives Matter trip to Rio de Janeiro. At Trinity College, I'll be speaking with Bishop John Selders. He's pastor at Amistad United Church of Christ. He's an associate college chaplain here at Trinity and, of course, co-founder of Moral Monday. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
All right. Now, I want to talk to you about the trip you took to Brazil. When did you go down?
We were there in July, the mid to the end of July. The trip was the occasion. I guess I better step back and tell you how we got there. We got a call from a woman by the name of Liz Martin, who is the leader of an organization called Brazil Police Watch. She and her family originally began to ask questions at the occasion of her nephew's brutal killing by a police officer in Rio.
This is an American woman?
An American woman and an American nephew, American family. Nephew was there working in Brazil for a number of years, teaching English. And apparently his killing by a police officer was because he was in fact defending and speaking up for one of his students who had come into some altercation with the police. Lots of details are sketchy. But at the end of the day, Liz, her nephew, was killed, and that began her and her family's journey to asking questions, getting involved with the State Department. Her senator, Edward Kennedy, and then later John Kerry, Secretary Kerry, got involved. And
so this happened a couple of years ago.
This was a number of years ago, and ultimately they brought to trial the officer that did kill the family member there. It was at that, as they were doing that work, she saw that very few Americans, and in fact much of the world, know little to nothing about the reign of terror that is happening in Brazil on black people in particular, black and brown people and poor people, state-sanctioned violence. And so she began her and this small organization that began an all-out effort to bring attention to the struggle of the Brazilian people in Brazil around state-sanctioned violence.
So she recommended you go down to Brazil?
She reached out to us to say, hey, I have an idea. Idea was gifted to me by a leader in the Black Lives Matter movement to possibly bring a delegation to Brazil and make some connections, be on the ground with folk, and then be a loudspeaker, if you will, be a voice, attract some media. Let's see if we can noise it abroad that something is happening in Brazil. And she said, what do you think? What do you think? And I said, I think it's a good idea. She said, would you and Pamela, your wife, be willing to go with us? I said, of course. Later, do you know other people that are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement that might be willing to, may have the time to? And so we did some reach out, and a delegation of 6 of us will ultimately pull together, and we went down during November. On the other end, there were a number of groups that were working to host us. The leaders of that group, who we now know, were a group called the Mothers of May. These are mothers who had begun to do work because their sons largely had been killed by police in Sao Paulo and in Rio and in several other cities around the country. And so this group called the Mothers of May were the leaders of this group of 5 or 6 core groups and their representatives that were actually our host for the 12-day visit to Brazil.
And while you were there, you went to some memorials?
Well, we went to a number. We every day was full of meetings and opportunities. We didn't know at the time. We said yes that our visit was also going to coincide with a number of different observances. One of which was the massacre at in front of a church called Candelaria in Rio. This place that had been a Catholic church that had been venerated to Mary, and in fact there is a shrine at this church and a memorial that depicts Mary holding children in her arms, a whole lot of different children. And so this place was seen as a place where children could be safe to spend the night. These are children who are on the street, young people who are homeless, largely. An incident 16 years ago where police rolled up on the set, as they say, and shot dozens of people, killing 8 people, 8 young children, young people. And today that place and that incident is commemorated. So our visit was to coincide with that visit and that observance. But as well, these groups had decided, wouldn't it be nice to have the occasion of leaders from the Black Lives Matter movement from the United States to come while we are talking about black resistance, black struggle, and state-sanctioned violence all over the country. And so they created what they call Black July. And Black July was an effort across the country to have events, conversations, forums, meetings at people's homes, just to talk about and the process, how people felt about state-sanctioned violence, what are the latest news about state-sanctioned violence, are there concerns and political maneuvering and or action steps that could happen. It was a fascinating opportunity for us to witness. Here were regular folk who were doing, who had gotten sick and tired of being sick and tired. Fannie Lou Hamer's line, and they were engaged and actively involved in the resistance movement. And so our coming was a part of this larger, broader campaign.
Short question: how did you communicate? Do you speak Portuguese?
My Portuguese, obrigado. That's it. That means, thank you. My Portuguese is awful. So part of what Brazilian Police Watch arranged was for us to have interpreters. And so we had 2 dedicated interpreters with our delegation. And then at several events, there were more interpreters. So a number of us had folk in our ear the whole time we were there, from the time we woke up in the morning and headed out to the time we went to sleep at night. So even ordering food at the restaurant was dramatical. But and of course a bit humbling for me as an American. I've traveled around the world some, and in most places I go, people want to speak English. They know I'm an American. I guess I have a sign that says American across my brow, and people want to speak English with Americans. It was very humbling because the Brazilians weren't that necessarily interested in speaking English. They were speaking Portuguese, and if I didn't understand Portuguese, well, we spoke hand talk, this, that, and pointed brand names.
Now you were in, if one word that Americans know about Brazil might be favela. Were you mostly in the favelas? We
were all over in different places. Favelas are really neighborhoods, and they are neighborhoods that are where poor and disenfranchised folk live. They are the spaces and places where largely black people live, people who would claim Afro-Brazilian identity or heritage. Now, when I say that is somewhat of a misnomer, because as Americans, we don't understand that most of the enslaved Africans that came from Africa to the Americas, most came to Brazil first. Brazil was the largest entry point into the Americas for enslaved Africans. So today, when we landed, and to experience the people, you would see that Brazil is largely an African country, because there are so many people that have characteristics that we would note as of color. And I would say it this way: they got lips and hips that are African and African related. So, and most Brazilians, if they were to tell the truth, would have to say they have some drop of African blood. So it was, again, outside of being in countries in Africa, to be in a space and see largely people who have African descent was pretty amazing to have that happen in the Americas.
And race is a problem down there. I mean, sometimes we hear a story, there's 25 categories and it's not a big deal. And
Yeah, there is. They have. So let's historically, Brazil came late to the abolition of enslaved people. 1888 is when they officially abolished slavery and the slave trade. And then within a generation or two, they had created policy that then created law. So they had developed policy that then created law that actually X'd out race as a core identity of Brazilians. Now, so to the degree that at some point here, you are identified, here in America, we identified as African American or Asian American or Native American. We have these broad classifications. They have color shade as a classification or as classifications. And that there is a policy called racial democracy, where they really whitened, or the attempt was to whiten Brazil. And so they imported Europeans and other people of European descent, and they were encouraged to intermarry and mix and mate with indigenous folk so that they could, quote, lighten the race. What ultimately happened, we know what the science really is. When you do that, you just get more people of color.
just different colors.
That's right, different shades of people of color. But so it's a fascinating reading. While they understand that race is understood differently across the world, they hold to this idea that we don't have a race problem. But of course, wink, wink, they do have a race problem. There's difference made. The darker hued you are, the less access you have. It is the function of what we would call, in the larger, broader, global context, white supremacy, and it is alive and well there, to the point that people who are involved in politics, who have offices in government, are of lighter hue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, I actually heard you give a presentation about your trip, and so one thing that stuck in my mind was that in a favela, they had a kind of police training academy, and there was lots of gunfire. If you could just talk about that.
Sure. One of the favelas we went to in Rio, the favelas, again, are neighborhoods where largely black and brown people live. They are the poor neighborhoods. They are the neighborhoods that are in higher elevation and range. Rio is situated between the ocean and mountain ranges that are very near the coast. And so, in particular, the better, flatter geography is for more wealthier people, and the mountainous or inaccessible places or least accessible places weren't less developed, and of course then that's where these favelas were situated. Favelas were blocked off and cordoned off like many of our neighborhoods are in America or in any urban context. There are bad neighborhoods, quote, and there are good neighborhoods, quote. One favela in particular has situated right adjacent to it what is called a police city. It is a huge, massive 30, 40 block compound.
30, 40 blocks.
Compound, huge compound, where police from all over the country are brought in there to do their police training. Part of their police training, obviously, is with guns. And so, can you imagine 24/7, every day, from the morning to the evening, you hear gunplay, gunfire, what we named as gun games, shooting target practice, if you will, all day, into the early part of the evening and night, every day. This particular training facility, lodged next to this favela, existed, and it was jarring to be in a space where to hear gunfire on the regular. And it was in this particular favela we got the opportunity to spend some time with several families, several moms in particular who had lost sons to the gun violence. And so my heart went out to several of them who I could only imagine what kind of trauma or re-trauma it would be to hear gunfire and to know that just around the corner, just up the street, is a place that are training police who did the very thing to my son. Now they're continuing this for other families to have to experience as well.
Now, you learned a lot about Brazil and police violence against minorities and so on. Were they asking you a lot about Moral Monday and Black Lives Matter and trying to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. We had this fascinating and fabulous opportunity to exchange, if you will. Our going, what we don't often know as Americans in a broad sense, blackness, or what is quote to be culturally cool and black, is exported from the United States across the world. So our movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, has caught hold across the world, globally, and there is a sense that something is happening that in the United States that we want to be a part of, and so we were there to affirm that yes, the work that is happening here or there in Brazil, in Rio, and Sao Paulo, and Salvador, and these major cities in Brazil, is connected to a global network of resistance that is happening throughout time and currently here. So that Ferguson is connected to New York City, that is connected to Gaza, that is connected to Cape Town, that is connected to Rio. We are in both this global context of local folk resisting the notion or the idea that the state should go unchecked as it rains terror on its citizenry. But secondly, that this resistance has something to do with saying no and taking one's own ability and to begin to act in ways as we as Americans would champion. I mean, quite frankly, the Boston Tea Party wasn't about a tea and a party, was it? And yet we tout that as this the revolutionary act, as opposed to thugging and gangstering that we get, that gets characterized when things like a rebellion happens in Ferguson or Baltimore.
Maybe we could close with your visit to the most famous statue in Brazil.
Yeah, we went to see Jesus. That's what we call it. The Christ the Redeemer is probably the most recognizable symbol of Brazil. And as in any kind of landmark like that, my sons, the kids would say the hustle was on. I mean, from the time we landed in the area, in the region, folk were trying to sell you something, trying to get you a ticket, scalping, and, all of that. Once we got through all the maze of on the bus, off the bus, walking up, doing this, that, and the other, there was a bit of a hustle and disconcertingly, lines and winding, lines and such. Once we got to the very top, we realized a couple of things. One, we were one of few darker hued people there. It certainly is a tourist attraction, and we were then considered the novelty, and were approached on a couple of occasions asking us what I would call kind of inappropriate questions, and people making assumptions about our visit, why we were there, and where we were actually from. It was quite a, my reflection back, I'll say one word about going up to see Jesus. Jesus is a white granite, kind of white stoned guy. He obviously has white features when you look at him there, and he overlooks this country that is a largely chocolate country. It's a black country, and so there's something there that I'm still trying to process, even these several weeks after our visit.
Were you moved by the statue, or was it mostly sort of political things that you were thinking about when you saw it?
Yeah, I wasn't moved. I wasn't moved in love and revelry. I was moved in anger and resentment to the fact that the church, along with corporations, went to establish this monument alongside, as we begin to do our history work and study and talk with the people, in the 1930s, this thing was erected and built. At the same time, the policy that we talked about around racial democracy had then moved from being racial democracy policy into law. So this was the consummating of what was talked about that then got legalized and then symbolized, that white is right and all others pale in comparison. And this symbol of Jesus looking out on this chocolate country in the most benevolent, way, with the symbol of the cross, arms reaching wide, him kind of head tilted sort of down in deference to all you poor things. No, I wasn't moved to reverie and appreciation for God. I was mad and upset and still in processing what does it mean. But I will say Brazil is not the only space and place and country that has done that has moved from policy to law to symbols that drive home particular narratives.
Thank you for talking.
Thank you, Stan. Appreciate it.
A cartoon from Brazilian cartoonist Carlos Latoufe about resistance in Brazil to police brutality. Bishop Selders and Moral Monday had a demonstration in Hartford on September 18th and walked into the state legislative building to deliver their legislative proposals to the governor's office.
Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on free.
It's an honor. There's no excuse for systems of abuse. There's no excuse for systems.
So this is it. This is the governor's office. So we're here to serve notice, representing faith leaders from across the state. To say we want more oral legislation done.
Okay.
And so we have a list of demands. You'll get this electronically as well, but this is kind of a formal, kind of a symbolic, yet pretty important for folks to know.
As we record, Moral Monday is planning a protest against the outrage in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.